This is the second episode of Deconstructing ADHD. I'm Helen Pengelly and the founder of the Heal With Helen podcast. And in this series of talks, I'm talking about my experience of being diagnosed with ADHD in February 2022 at the age of 58. I spoke in the first episode about what led to my diagnosis. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about some of the things that happened afterwards. And during these talks, I'm also referring to research that I've done, books I've read from various experts, and it's also based on my own experience. So I do encourage you to do your own investigations, your own research into what is ADHD, and also understand that, as I said, this is based on my own experience, it's my opinions, and it's not intended as a substitute for medical advice. So if you're suffering, if you have any mental health issues, then do go and see a professional. So following my diagnosis, I had a follow-up appointment with the psychiatrist to discuss treatment options. Now, treatment to me seems like a funny word to use because I associate treatment with illness or injuries, but it's the one they use, and at the moment I can't think of a better one. So the first response advised by NICE, which I have discovered today, it used to be called the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, but it's now the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. And their recommendation that the first response is to offer medication. Now, I mentioned this in the previous episode that the doctor that I saw didn't advise it for me because of potential side effects. He gave me some literature about, I can't even remember what the drugs were called now. I know there's various ones. And there was a whole long list of potential side effects. He said, you've managed all these years without it. Now, as I said, this is not a substitute for medical advice, and I don't judge people who take medication. It's personal choice. But I had also a lot of strategies that I developed over the many years. I mean, I've been meditating since 2006. And I realized that a lot of the benefits that I read about from taking the drugs, I got from meditating, a calmer mind, being able to think clearly. So at this stage, I also decided that this was going to be my main focus in terms of my work as well, is teaching people to meditate, spreading and sharing the benefits of meditation for everybody. And there are a lot of misconceptions around meditation as well. And I have seen various posts of people saying that it's harder for people with, people who've been diagnosed with ADHD, but that is obviously not true, because I've been doing it for many years. And I'm going to be talking more about the mind and the brain and the subconscious. I mean, I have done lots of reading on this before and since my diagnosis, and around trauma and its effects on the brain. So proceeding with this, they also recommended I got in touch with, if I wanted extra support, with the local mental health services. And I had to do that via my doctor, not the one who diagnosed me, but my GP practice. And they recommended also possibly CBT. So there was a long waiting list for individual CBT sessions, and they offered, it was a mini course, so four sessions where they talked about CBT and gave you some strategies. And a lot of this involves thinking and trying to change your thoughts. And I listened to a couple of them, but as I'm also a qualified coach, I've been a coach for nearly 10 years, a lot of what they taught in the sessions was nothing new to me. And I decided not to pursue the CBT option. And I've heard various trying to think of the word here, but various experiences with it, shall we say. Most of them not that great, that they don't find it that effective, because you're trying to solve a problem or trying to solve something with the rational part of your brain, which most of the time does not work, because that's what gets you into difficulties in the first place. So continuing along my journey, then I decide, well, I'm going to focus on meditation for me, because that's what works. And I've also had a lot of success with helping other people who've been diagnosed with ADHD, to help them to meditate, to get them to understand their minds a bit more, to get into that space between noticing something and reacting to it. Now, one of the things that's in the list of ADHD symptoms is impulsivity. So for me, that was something that was one of the things that I had struggled with over the years when I look back. And being aware of that made me able to understand why possibly I'd done things in the past which didn't seem to make sense, because I was reacting on the moment before the thought part of my brain kicked in. It's almost like acting on an instinct. And I'm going to come on to more about why that happens as we progress through these episodes. So coming towards the end of 2022, last year, as at the time of recording this, I was heading into a bit of a slump again with my mental health. I was still going through the process with the DWP to get support for when I was signed off, because I'd got into some, well, not financial difficulties, but I was worried about, being able to afford to pay my bills. But one of the other things that I did during this time, because of my training, my experience, was letting go a lot of the things, learning to let go and practicing letting go of things I didn't have any control over. So I didn't have any control over what they did, what decisions they made, even though it was upsetting me at times. I was practicing not reacting to this. Not saying it was easy, it wasn't, it was very difficult. So it was coming back to what I could control. So what I could control was how I responded. And I started at the beginning of 2022 to keep what I called an abundance journal. And I wrote down, it was in the back of my diary, because you get those like year to view planners. And I just wrote down in there every time some money came into my life. And it started with just, it might be I found a penny on the ground. Even that went on there. So bits of money that came from work or from gifts, or even, vouchers, like saving up my Nectar points when I go shopping, and then I can use those towards my shopping. And any other gift vouchers or anything like that all went in there, because this is based on the premise of what you focus on expands. And as I did that, more and more opportunities seemed to come in. And despite what you hear in the news and the cost of living crisis and things like that, well, I don't watch the news. I haven't done for years, because I don't want to be fed all that negativity. But it's really important what you put into your brain is just as important as what you put into your body. So you would, hopefully, most of us are careful to some extent about what we eat. We try to eat healthily to do the best for our bodies. But it's the same with our minds. What we're watching, what we're reading is having an impact on our mental health. So this is obviously, again, this is something that I can control, and I can start to appreciate the good things that happen in my life, and coming back very much to the present moment. Yes, I was feeling anxious about the future. How am I going to pay the rent next month? But then coming back to the present, thinking, well, I've paid my rent this month. I have a roof over my head. I have food in my fridge. At the moment, I'm okay. And so it was almost, it felt like a real test of my faith to come back and have that faith that it's going to work out one way or another, and I have to find this strength within me. So gratitude and appreciation for what I already had. And I live by the sea, so just going down to the beach and just looking at the sea and the sky, that beautiful view at the end of my road, and the appreciation that I have this just here, a 2-minute walk from my front door. So that was what got me through those difficult times. And what you notice, what you focus on expands. So as I focused on abundance and every little bit of money that was coming in, more opportunities opened up. So that in terms of work, or I would randomly get some money from my parents, or I would find out about grants that you could apply for. And one, for example, was to help with the cost of your energy bills. So that paid my energy bills for several months. So things like that, because, and often these things aren't advertised. Nobody tells you about them. So you have to look. And also during this time, it was a real lesson for me to accept that help, because that's a trauma response as well. I've since learned is not asking for help because you don't feel that you deserve it. And also because of my profession, there was part of me thinking, well, I should be able to cope. I shouldn't be struggling. I should be able to do this. But there was that acknowledgement that we don't exist in isolation. You know, the way we live our lives now is very different to how it used to be when we lived in communities and we'd all be supporting each other, and we'd grow food together, we'd share the childcare, whatever. But now we're we're in our homes in small groups, living in isolation. And I was become very conscious of that, really, because I spend time on retreats where you're living in a community, and I can do my bit, which is the cooking, and I don't need to worry about other things that other people are taking care of. But for me, I was very conscious, well, I'm here living on my own now. My children have all grown up and left, so I'm responsible for everything, paying all the bills. And I rent, so my landlord is responsible for repairs and things like that, but I'm the one who has to chase them up and contact them when things need doing, and when they invariably don't do them the first time, it's again, and this is all adds to like the mental workload as well, and all that responsibility falling on one person, where in the past, and maybe in some certain situations today, it's shared, even if it's a couple, sharing things. There's that extra pressure when you're doing it on your own. So that was a lesson for me, that it was actually okay to ask for help when I needed it. And it doesn't mean that I'm a failure and I've failed at life. That I put unrealistic expectations on myself a lot of the time, and noticing my self-talk, all the shoulds. Well, you should be able to do this, Helen, you should. And okay, in theory I can, but one person cannot do everything. So that was another lesson, was accepting help. So the three main ones, I think, were the appreciation and gratitude, noticing abundance, and then accepting help and feeling worthy of it, not feeling like I'm a failure because my parents sent me some money, for example. I can be grateful that they're able to do that, and I don't need to go and live in a bedsit or something like that. I can stay in my flat, and where I'm happy. I've lived here for 6 years, and at that time, the thought of having to move, what would I do with my stuff? And all that adding to that extra mental pressure. So the lessons I learned were finding that kind of inner resourcefulness, and not not expecting, that's probably the wrong word, but having faith that the support will come. It might not come in the way that I expect, but I've survived this long, something will work out one way or another. And in the end, I gave up with DWP, the PIP and the universal credit thing. I did get the other one, the access to work. They are very different. It's almost difficult to believe that they're the same department, because they could not have been more helpful. So if you're listening to this and you haven't looked into access to work, they can pay for coaching as well. I didn't go for that option because I am a coach anyway, and that is definitely something that's worth looking into. And again, it was like not feeling like I'm a failure. I probably won't need this forever, but it's going to help me through this stage of my life now. And it's okay, because I need to focus on my recovery. All this had been building up for many, many, many years. And part of the problem was that I'd been trying to do it all on my own. And then, of course, eventually everything fell apart because it all became too much. And looking back over my life, I could see the times that I burned out, and it became this cycle of crash and burn. And I didn't want that to happen anymore. I wanted to sort of be more consistent with my self-care. And I think, you know, compared to a lot of people, I know I'm actually pretty good at that. But as with anything, there's always room for improvement, and learning not to feel guilty about taking time off, and I can feel it now almost in my body when I'm starting to put that pressure on myself. So we're coming now, this was almost a year after my diagnosis, earlier in 2023, and I did have another low point because I'd gone to a hearing, and for this universal credit, for a while I was signed off to say, you know, that I was signed off with good reason. I needed time out to focus on getting better, but I wish I'd never gone to that now. I'm not going to talk about it because I don't want to bring that back up. But suffice to say that the stories that I've read in the papers, heard in the media about people who've had their benefits cut, and you know, the things that have happened, you know, people taking their lives, I can completely understand that if you haven't got those tools in your toolbox to be able to get through these times. And I was, again, appreciative for all the work that I'd done, the inner work, and it was very, very difficult. And I've done all that work and it was still difficult. But in the end, I thought, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. It's not worth it. I'm going to find another way. Something will happen. And it did. So I obviously, I'm still here to tell the tale. And I'm going to talk about that in the next episode. So I've got through the difficult times, shall we say. I kept thinking, oh, here we go. I've hit rock bottom. And then you think, oh, it happens again. But I've realized that that's part of a cycle. You go through these things in life. It's a normal part of life. And I think now it's about, what can I learn from these challenges? And part of the reason for me doing this series on here is to share my wisdom, my experience, because what I went through, I would not wish on anybody. Nobody should have to go through that. It was quite dehumanizing sometimes, but I was also aware of the other people. They're doing their best, and it was about practicing compassion for them because they haven't been given mental health training. They're not trauma informed, so they don't understand. All they're doing, we have to tick these boxes. Oh, because you can walk down the road and you can cook a pizza, that means you can work. So even though I've explained about, you know, some of my previous experiences that had led to this, they're not interested. They're there to tick their boxes. And that was another thing that I could be grateful for, that I'm not doing that job. And I tell you what, I was so grateful for that. And anybody, as I say, who has to go through that, and I've done volunteering, you know, with people who are experiencing homelessness or, you know, in substandard accommodation, because I was close to that myself and I know what it's like because I've been there. And it's about practicing that compassion for everybody, because anybody can end up in that situation. Not that they should have to in this day and age and in this country, but it happens. But there is another way, and I'm going to be talking about that in the next episode. I've touched on it a bit today, and these are things that perhaps you might be interested in starting to put into your life. Is that practicing gratitude, noticing abundance, the things that you have rather than the things that you haven't got, and then notice you'll get more of it. Well, thank you again for listening today, and I'll be back with another episode to talk more about my journey and my learnings and understandings about what is this thing that we call ADHD, and just deconstructing it a little bit more. Well, thank you again. Take care. Go well, and lots of love.